It seemed like just another routine delivery day for Sarah Carter, a dedicated postwoman known throughout her town for her reliability and friendly smile. The quiet suburban streets stretched endlessly ahead, lined with neat front yards, picket fences, and parked cars. The soft rustling of leaves in the cool morning breeze and the distant barking of a dog created a peaceful rhythm that Sarah had grown accustomed to over the years. With her mailbag slung over her shoulder, she moved efficiently from house to house, placing letters and small packages in mailboxes with practiced ease. To anyone watching, she appeared to be just another hard-working postal worker, dependable, quiet, and unremarkable. But there was something about Sarah that no one in the neighborhood could have guessed, something she hadn't shared with anyone in this small, sleepy town. Before she ever slipped on her postal uniform, Sarah had lived a very different life. Years ago, she was a world-class athlete, a rising star in the world of gymnastics. Her name had once echoed through packed arenas, her face featured in sports magazines and Olympic broadcasts. She had dazzled judges and audiences alike with gravity-defying flips, elegant balance routines, and perfect landings that seemed almost superhuman. Back then, she was unstoppable, a force of precision, power, and grace. But that was a lifetime ago. Injuries, personal losses, and the relentless pressure of competitive sports had pushed Sarah away from the spotlight. She retired quietly, leaving behind the bright lights and roaring applause. She moved far from the sports world, seeking peace and anonymity in a quiet town where no one would recognize her. Delivering mail offered stability, simplicity, and a sense of purpose, everything she thought she needed. Over the years, her past faded into distant memories, like an old dream she rarely revisited. She no longer trained or competed, and the world of gymnastics seemed like a story from someone else's life. Yet, no matter how much time passed, the discipline, strength, and instincts she had honed during years of intense training never truly left her. They remained, buried beneath her calm exterior, like a dormant flame waiting for a spark. That spark came on what seemed like an ordinary Tuesday morning. Sarah was halfway through her route, her bag noticeably lighter after hours of deliveries. As she turned onto Willowbrook Lane, a long, quiet stretch with few houses, she noticed something unusual. A group of motorcycles rumbled slowly down the street, their engines growling like restless beasts. There were 3 of them, clad in leather jackets with worn helmets and dark visors that hid their faces. They rolled along at a crawling speed, their presence disruptive against the calm backdrop of the quiet suburb. Sarah had seen bikers pass through before, but something about these riders felt different. They weren't just passing by, they seemed to be lingering, watching. Shaking off her unease, she continued her deliveries, determined not to let them intimidate her. She had dealt with difficult people before: aggressive dogs, impatient homeowners, even the occasional prankster. This was probably nothing more than a random encounter. But as she approached the next house, she heard the unmistakable screech of tires behind her. She turned just in time to see the 3 motorcycles skid to a stop, blocking the narrow street like a makeshift barrier. Her heart quickened, but she kept her expression neutral, refusing to show any fear. One of the bikers dismounted, his boots hitting the pavement with a heavy thud. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and moved with an air of authority. His leather jacket was scuffed and patched, hinting at a life lived on the edge. The other 2 stayed mounted, their engines still rumbling, like predators circling prey. "Hey, mail lady," the first biker called out, his voice rough and mocking. "You lost or something?" Sarah met his gaze steadily, her eyes calm but alert. "Just doing my job," she replied evenly, her voice steady despite the growing tension in the air. He smirked, taking a slow step closer. "You're on our street now," he said, his tone dripping with menace. "Maybe you should pay a toll for passing through." The other bikers chuckled darkly, their amusement echoing through the quiet street. Sarah felt her pulse quicken, but not from fear. It was something else, something she hadn't felt in a long time. Her mind sharpened, calculating distances, evaluating potential escape routes, noting every movement and detail. Years of intense training kicked in like second nature, though she kept her posture relaxed and non-threatening. "I'm just here to deliver the mail," she said firmly, taking a measured step back. "I don't want any trouble." The lead biker's smirk widened. "Too late for that," he sneered. Before she could respond, one of the bikers revved his engine and lurched forward, skidding to a stop just inches from her. The sudden, aggressive move was meant to startle her, to make her flinch or stumble. But Sarah didn't move. Her body stayed perfectly balanced, her expression unreadable. The bikers exchanged surprised glances, clearly expecting a different reaction. They were used to people shrinking back in fear, stumbling over themselves to get away. But Sarah stood her ground, calm and steady as a statue. "You should walk away," she warned quietly, her voice low but firm, carrying a weight that made even the wind seem to pause. The bikers laughed again, mistaking her calm confidence for empty bravado. They had no idea who they were dealing with. For the first time in years, Sarah felt that familiar rush, the electric thrill of a challenge, the adrenaline surge she had long suppressed. Her mind raced through possibilities, strategies forming in seconds. She wasn't the same young gymnast she'd once been, but her strength, agility, and precision were still very much alive. And if these bikers thought she was just another helpless target, they were about to learn a lesson they'd never forget. What started as an ordinary delivery route was about to become the most intense and unexpected competition of Sarah Carter's life. The air around Sarah crackled with tension as the bikers closed in, their engines rumbling like distant thunder. She remained still, her sharp eyes tracking every movement, every shift in their stance. Years of rigorous training had taught her more than just gymnastics. She understood timing, balance, and how to read people's intentions through the smallest body language cues. The lead biker, still smirking, pulled off his helmet, revealing a rugged, scarred face framed by messy, dark hair. His eyes gleamed with arrogance, the kind born from getting away with intimidation far too often. He jerked his chin toward Sarah. "You don't seem scared," he said, almost amused. "Most people would be begging us to leave by now." Sarah didn't blink. "I'm not most people." His smirk faded slightly, replaced by a flicker of curiosity mixed with irritation. He wasn't used to defiance. "Well, maybe you should be," he growled, stepping closer, invading her personal space. "You think that uniform makes you untouchable." Sarah's muscles tensed, though she remained outwardly calm. Every instinct told her the situation was about to escalate. The bikers were testing her, prodding for weakness. She knew she couldn't run, they'd catch her in seconds with their motorcycles. Talking her way out seemed unlikely too. These men were bullies looking for a victim, and backing down would only fuel their aggression. She adjusted the strap of her mailbag, her fingers brushing against the sturdy canvas material. It wasn't much, but in skilled hands, even a simple object could become a tool or a weapon. "You've made your point," she said steadily. "Let me do my job, and I'll be on my way." The lead biker laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Not how this works, sweetheart," he sneered. "You're on our turf now. And we like to make sure strangers feel welcome." Behind him, the second biker, a wiry man with cruel, darting eyes, revved his engine again, inching his motorcycle even closer. His front wheel brushed against the toe of Sarah's boot, a clear act of intimidation. She didn't move. The third biker, broader and more silent than the others, watched her intently. He hadn't spoken yet, but his tight grip on the handlebars suggested he was ready to jump in if things turned violent. Sarah's mind worked rapidly. She needed to stay calm, focused. She couldn't afford even a moment of hesitation. The memories of countless competitions surged back, long hours of punishing training, split-second decisions made mid-air, and the relentless discipline that had once defined her life. They thought she was just a harmless postwoman. They couldn't have been more wrong. For a moment, Sarah's mind drifted back to the roaring arena of the World Gymnastics Championship. She could still hear the deafening applause, the announcer's booming voice calling her name, the bright lights blinding her as she stepped onto the mat. Back then, she thrived under pressure. Every competition had been a test of skill, determination, and willpower. She remembered her signature routine, the one that had earned her a place on the Olympic team. A breathtaking series of flips, twists, and landings executed with flawless precision. She had been unstoppable, fearless. But that was a long time ago. The applause had faded, and life had taken her down a different path. Yet, in this moment, standing alone against three menacing bikers, she realized something important: her competitive spirit had never left her. It burned now brighter than ever. The lead biker was still talking, spewing threats meant to break her resolve. But Sarah barely heard him. Her focus sharpened, her body instinctively shifting into a balanced stance, light on her feet. The wiry biker leaned forward, sneering. "Maybe we'll take that bag of yours, looks like it's got something valuable." Sarah's gaze locked onto him, calculating. He was reckless, impulsive, the type to make the first move without thinking. She could use that. "You don't want what's in this bag," she said coldly. "Trust me." He laughed mockingly. "Oh, I think we do." He twisted the throttle, lunging his motorcycle forward in a sudden burst of speed, exactly what she'd been waiting for. With the fluid grace of a gymnast who had trained her entire life, Sarah sidestepped at the last second, letting the bike miss her by inches. In one seamless motion, she swung her mailbag upward with stunning force, striking the biker's arm and knocking him off balance. His motorcycle wobbled violently before crashing sideways onto the pavement. The stunned biker let out a string of curses as he scrambled to his feet, clutching his bruised arm. His helmet had fallen off, exposing a face twisted with rage and disbelief. For the first time, the other two bikers hesitated, clearly caught off guard. They had expected a frightened, helpless woman, not someone capable of dropping one of their own in the blink of an eye. Sarah adjusted her grip on the mailbag, now more of a makeshift weapon than a delivery tool. Her breathing was steady, her mind clear. Years of gymnastics had taught her how to channel adrenaline into controlled power, and she was prepared for whatever came next. "You made a big mistake," the lead biker snarled, yanking a chain from his belt. "You think you're tough?" Sarah tilted her head slightly, eyes unwavering. "Try me." His face contorted with rage, and he charged, chain swinging. With lightning-fast reflexes, Sarah ducked low, spinning out of the chain's path. Using her momentum, she delivered a powerful kick to his knee, sending him stumbling backward with a pained grunt. The broad, silent biker finally reacted, revving his engine and speeding toward her. But Sarah was already in motion. In one fluid movement, she sprinted forward and launched herself onto a nearby parked car, using its hood as a springboard. With a gravity-defying backflip, she soared over the rushing motorcycle, landing gracefully on her feet behind him. The biker's eyes widened in stunned disbelief as he skidded to a stop, nearly crashing into a mailbox. Breathing heavily but still composed, Sarah faced them all, her body humming with energy. They weren't laughing anymore. For the first time, the bikers realized they had seriously underestimated their target. "You were saying something about being untouchable," Sarah said coolly, her voice steady despite the rapid beat of her heart. The lead biker wiped blood from the corner of his mouth, his expression a dangerous mix of fury and fear. He knew they were outmatched, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. The street fell silent, the only sound the distant rustling of leaves, and the steady, determined breathing of a former Olympic gymnast ready for whatever came next. The peaceful hum of the suburban morning shattered as the deafening roar of motorcycle engines echoed down the street. Birds scattered from nearby trees, startled by the sudden noise. Sarah Carter, focused on her mail route, paused mid-step and turned toward the sound. 3 large motorcycles barreled down the quiet street, their chrome frames glinting in the sunlight. The riders, clad in worn leather jackets adorned with patches and chains, exuded menace. Their faces were partially hidden beneath dark helmets with mirrored visors, making them appear faceless and predatory. With a screech of tires, they skidded to a halt directly in front of Sarah, cutting off her path. Their engines idled loudly, filling the air with the harsh, mechanical growl of restless beasts. Sarah's grip on her mailbag tightened instinctively. Her eyes narrowed as she quickly assessed the situation, her mind switching into survival mode. Years of intense competition had sharpened her instincts. She could read people like an open book, and these men radiated bad intentions. The lead biker swung his leg off his motorcycle and stalked toward her with slow, deliberate steps. He was a towering brute with a muscular build and a scar that slashed across his left eyebrow. His jacket bore the name Dean stitched in bold, red letters. The air around him seemed to crackle with authority, marking him as the one in charge. "Hey, mail lady." Dean sneered, his voice rough and mocking. "You lost or something?" Behind him, his 2 companions chuckled darkly, exchanging knowing glances. The smaller one was wiry, with sharp, restless eyes that darted around like a predator searching for weakness. The other was a hulking, silent figure with fists like sledgehammers, his face set in a grim scowl. Sarah held her ground, her expression neutral despite the tension coiling in her chest. Years of performing under intense scrutiny had taught her how to remain calm, even when fear threatened to surface. "Just doing my job," she replied evenly, stepping to the side to continue her route. Dean's smirk widened into something far more dangerous. He took another step forward, blocking her path once more. "Not so fast," he drawled, his tone dripping with mockery. "We got special delivery requests." The other bikers laughed again, their amusement cruel and expectant. Sarah could feel their eyes boring into her, watching her every move like hungry predators circling prey. "I don't want any trouble," she said firmly, keeping her voice steady. Dean chuckled, a cold, humorless sound. "Trouble? Nah. We're just being friendly. Thought you might need some assistance." His words were laced with threat, his intentions crystal clear. Sarah took a slow breath, forcing herself to remain calm. Running wasn't an option. They had motorcycles and could easily catch her. Calling for help was useless, the street was deserted, and she hadn't seen another soul since turning onto the stretch of road. Her only choice was to stand her ground. Dean's eyes gleamed with malicious delight as he took another deliberate step toward her. "What's in the bag, mail lady? Got anything valuable?" Sarah's mind raced. Her mail bag was heavy with letters and small packages, not exactly treasure, but that didn't matter. These men weren't after the contents of the bag. They were after power and control. The wiry biker, growing impatient, revved his engine and rolled his bike closer, stopping just inches from her feet. He grinned maliciously, showing crooked, yellowed teeth. "Come on, sweetheart, hand it over." Still, Sarah didn't move. Her stance shifted ever so slightly, feet planted firmly, ready. She met the biker's gaze with unflinching determination. "You really don't want what's in this bag," she said coolly. The bikers exchanged surprised glances, momentarily thrown off by her calm defiance. Most people would be panicking, pleading, or running by now. But Sarah stood steady, her eyes sharp and calculating. Dean's smirk faded for the briefest moment before twisting into a sneer. "You got some mouth on you," he growled, pulling a thick chain from his belt. The metal links clinked ominously as he wrapped one end around his fist. The wiry biker snickered. "Think she's tough? Let's see how tough she really is." The hulking biker, silent until now, cracked his knuckles loudly, his massive hands curling into fists the size of bricks. Sarah's heartbeat pounded in her ears, but her expression remained calm. She shifted her weight subtly, her body aligning into a balanced stance, a habit drilled into her from years of gymnastics training. She had faced pressure before, though never quite like this. Dean took another menacing step forward, swinging the chain lazily in his hand. Last chance, male lady. Drop the bag, or things get real messy. Sarah's lips pressed into a thin line. There was no reasoning with them. They wouldn't back down, and she couldn't afford to show weakness. You should walk away, she warned softly. The bikers burst into mocking laughter, the sound echoing down the empty street. They thought they had already won. Dean's grin widened as he lunged forward, swinging the chain with vicious intent. But Sarah was faster. With reflexes honed from years of explosive routines, she twisted her body just in time, the chain whistling harmlessly past her shoulder. Before Dean could react, she pivoted smoothly on her heel, driving her elbow into his ribs with stunning force. The impact sent him stumbling backward, gasping in pain. The wiry biker cursed and charged, aiming to grab her. Sarah ducked low, spinning beneath his outstretched arms. In one fluid motion, she swept her leg around, knocking his feet out from under him. He hit the ground hard, wheezing in shock. The hulking biker roared in anger, charging like a freight train. Sarah sidestepped at the last moment, using his own momentum against him. He careened into a parked car, setting off its alarm with a piercing wail. Breathing steadily, Sarah squared her shoulders, eyes locked on the three stunned bikers now sprawled across the street. For the first time, uncertainty flickered in their eyes. You were saying something about a special delivery? She asked coldly, her voice as steady as her stance. Dean struggled to his feet, clutching his side with a grimace. His expression twisted with equal parts rage and disbelief. He hadn't expected resistance, especially not from a seemingly harmless postwoman. But Sarah wasn't just a postwoman. She was a former Olympic gymnast with strength, precision, and years of battle-tested resilience etched into her very bones. The bikers had come looking for easy prey. They'd just made the worst mistake of their lives. Dean staggered backward, gasping for breath. His pride stung as much as his ribs. He had faced plenty of fights, but nothing like this. Who was this woman? The wiry biker, still on the ground, snarled and scrambled to his feet, rage burning in his eyes. He grabbed a rusted crowbar from the side of his bike and brandished it like a weapon. His hand shook, not from fear but from the shock of being outmaneuvered so effortlessly. The silent, hulking biker clenched his fists tighter, veins bulging in his muscular arms. He was used to ending fights with a single punch. His towering frame loomed menacingly as he advanced, blocking out the sun. Sarah's breath remained steady, her mind calculating every possible move and counter-move. She had competed on the world's biggest stages, where a single misstep meant defeat or worse. This was no different, except now the stakes were life and limb. Dean spat on the ground and barked, "You think you're tough, huh? Think you can take all of us?" His face twisted with fury, but there was a trace of wariness in his eyes now. Sarah didn't respond. Words were pointless. She shifted her stance slightly, weight balanced, ready for the next attack. For a fleeting moment, memories surged back, the thunderous roar of the crowd, the blinding stadium lights, the unmistakable smell of chalk in the air. She could hear her coach's voice calling from the sidelines, "Breathe. Focus. Be faster." Her most famous gymnastics routine came back to her, a daring floor exercise packed with gravity-defying flips, spins, and perfectly timed landings. The judges had held their breath, stunned by her precision. Her competitors had watched with envy, knowing they couldn't match her level of control and execution. Those skills were about to be put to use again, but this time, there were no mats to soften the fall. The wiry biker lunged first, swinging the crowbar with reckless fury. His movements were wild and uncoordinated, a street brawler relying on brute force. Sarah sidestepped gracefully, the weapon slicing through empty air. Before he could recover, she spun on the ball of her foot and delivered a spinning kick to his wrist, sending the crowbar clattering to the ground. He howled in pain, clutching his arm, eyes wide with disbelief. Dean cursed under his breath and charged with the chain still wrapped around his fist. He swung it toward her face in a brutal arc, aiming to end the fight with one decisive blow. But Sarah was already moving. She ducked low, her knees bending in a perfect gymnast squat, and sprang upward with explosive power. Her shoulder rammed into Dean's chest, knocking the wind out of him and sending him stumbling back once again. The hulking biker roared like a bull, lowering his head as he rushed toward her. This time, Sarah didn't wait for him to close the distance. She sprinted forward, leaping onto the hood of a nearby parked car with the fluid grace of a seasoned athlete. From the elevated position, she launched herself into the air, twisting into a flawless aerial flip. The hulking biker's eyes widened as she soared over his head, landing silently behind him like a phantom. He spun around, but she was already 2 steps ahead. With a swift, precise kick to the back of his knee, she sent him crashing to the ground with a pained grunt. His massive hands clawed at the pavement as he struggled to rise, but she delivered another kick to his side, keeping him down. Dean and the wiry biker regrouped, panting and seething with rage. Their expressions shifted from overconfidence to something far more dangerous: desperation. They were used to being the hunters, not the hunted. "You're dead." Dean spat venomously, blood dripping from his split lip. He yanked a switchblade from his belt, the blade gleaming menacingly in the sunlight. The wiry biker, still favoring his injured arm, circled to Sarah's right, looking for an opening. The hulking biker had managed to push himself halfway up, his face twisted with pain and humiliation. Sarah's mind remained razor-sharp, her every sense heightened. She could feel the tension vibrating in the air, the unspoken agreement between the 3 men to end this no matter the cost. "You should have walked away," Dean hissed. Sarah met his gaze without flinching. "So should you." Dean lunged, knife flashing toward her midsection. His movements were faster now, fueled by rage and adrenaline. Sarah twisted to the side, narrowly avoiding the blade's lethal arc. Before he could strike again, she grabbed his wrist with ironclad strength, twisting it sharply. He let out a strangled yell as the knife clattered to the pavement. With fluid precision, she locked his arm behind his back and shoved him face first into the side of his motorcycle. The wiry biker rushed in, fists flying. Sarah released Dean and spun to meet the attack, deflecting his punches with practiced ease. She jabbed upward, catching him beneath the chin with a swift uppercut that snapped his head back. He crumpled to the ground, groaning. Breathing heavily, Sarah turned just in time to see the hulking biker charging once more, this time wielding a heavy steel wrench. His massive frame loomed over her like a battering ram. In a split-second decision, Sarah sprinted toward a nearby utility pole. With practiced agility, she leapt up, grabbing hold of the metal crossbeam and swinging herself around like she was back on the uneven bars at the gym. Her body twisted mid-air, and she launched herself directly at the hulking biker, her feet connecting squarely with his chest. The impact sent him staggering back, crashing into Dean, who had just managed to get back on his feet. Both men tumbled to the ground in a heap, gasping for air. Sarah landed lightly on her feet, her chest rising and falling with steady breaths. Her body hummed with adrenaline, every muscle coiled and ready for another attack. But the fight was over. The bikers groaned and writhed on the pavement, too battered and stunned to continue. Their overconfidence had cost them dearly. Slowly, Dean raised his bruised face, locking eyes with Sarah. His expression was a mix of fury, humiliation, and something dangerously close to respect. "You," he rasped, still struggling for air. "Who are you?" Sarah slung her mailbag over her shoulder, her face calm but her eyes blazing with quiet intensity. "Just the mail lady," she said coolly. With that, She turned and walked away, leaving the bikers to lick their wounds and reconsider their future encounters with unsuspecting targets. As she strode down the street, her heart still pounding, Sarah couldn't help but smirk faintly. It seemed some skills were never forgotten, especially when survival was on the line. The bikers circled Sarah like vultures, sneering and laughing as they toyed with her mailbag. One of them, the wiry man with darting eyes, snatched a handful of letters and tossed them into the air. Envelopes fluttered down like wounded birds, scattering across the street. Sarah clenched her jaw but held her composure. Years of performing under the scrutinizing eyes of international judges had taught her to remain calm, no matter the chaos around her. She mentally calculated distances, noting the space between her and each biker, the angle of the street, and even the positions of the scattered mail. Every movement, every variable, was assessed with razor-sharp precision. Dean, the leader, chuckled darkly as he kicked a small package toward her. Oops.